a Republican president, but hardly a Republican speech. We'll get to more of it in a moment, but it was a rebuke of all politicians in Washington. And the America First part has his own party a little nervous because the Republicans are supposed to be the free market party or free trade and the more muscular, project American strength around the world. It didn't sound like that yesterday, did it?
No, it did not. And actually, Dan was the first person to write several months ago that he essentially was our first independent president. I think that was never more clear than it was in this inaugural speech. There was nothing actually surprising if you have been covering Donald Trump throughout this campaign. And yet, once it is said from the mouth of a president, it is very different. We don't quite know what America First is going to look like under this president. I was very struck by his line, and it really is in line with this view he has of the world in a clash of civilizations right now, where he talked about the civilized world joining to fight quote-unquote radical Islamic terrorism. He is clearly looking toward an alliance that talked about having with Russia, particularly in the Middle East, on ISIS. This has a lot of people very, very, very nervous, and I don't know what it's going to look like. It is, at minimum for Trump, a very clear opening extreme shot. He usually tends to do that and work a little bit of the way back, but he also does have a pretty dark view of where things are globally.
American carnage he talked about. He talked about ISIS, so he promised to completely eradicate. That's something that
it's a big goal.
In 2020 that will end up in an ad against him if he doesn't make that case. Let's listen before we continue the conversation. I just want to listen to a little bit more of this. A lot of you probably at home probably saw it yesterday, but here's Donald Trump. Again, this is his first act as president. He's standing on the steps of the Capitol, surrounded by the former president, surrounded by the members of Congress. He's here in Washington, and he essentially told them all, it's your fault.
For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while the people have borne the cost. Washington flourished, but the people did not share in its wealth. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. That all changes starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you.
So that's what I call the outside game. The only thing he didn't do was turn around and say, I mean you, and start pointing at people and saying, you know, I mean you. You did this, and you did this.
He needs a second act.
You're the problem. But then just minutes later, minutes after he finishes the speech, let's look at the scene inside. He's signing the documents. It says he can't officially nominate his cabinet members until he's president. So he's signing the documents inside, and he's yucking it up with Chuck Schumer, the Democratic Senate leader, with Nancy Pelosi, the House Democratic leader, with the members of the Republican leadership as well. Essentially, they were trading pens. Chuck Schumer initially got the Ben Carson pen, and he said, can I trade it in for the Veteran Affairs Secretary? Because I like him more. And this went on and on and on. This is the art of the deal, Donald Trump. So which Donald Trump is it? The outsider saying you're part of the problem? Or how much is this skill set going to be more important to getting anything done on tough issues? Because, yes, the Republicans run everything, but just barely in terms of the numbers of the majority.
John, right after, go ahead, Ted.
I think Maggie's point is right. He lays down markers, and then he walks them back a bit, and then he lays them down again. That worked very well in the campaign. It will be much more difficult for him to do that as president. I mean, because as president, he is going to have to begin to deliver. I mean, this was an extraordinary expression of ambition and of self-confidence that we heard yesterday, in addition to everything else that has been said about this remarkable speech. And the extravagance of the language is going to hit the reality of governing pretty soon. And at that point, then, can he still continue to hold that core support that he was speaking to yesterday? He wasn't speaking really to the whole country. He was speaking to the core Trump supporters. He needs to hold on to them, but he's going to have to govern, and govern a much messier process.
And the question is whether people in that building tune out that rhetoric that he, the speeches that he gives, his tweet storms. right after he was signing those papers, he went across the Capitol into Statuary Hall where they had that bipartisan lunch. I was watching part of that, and they were yucking it up in there. He was in a very intense conversation with Chuck Schumer about, which we learned later was about nominees, and there was obviously some dispute there. He wasn't able to resolve any sort of stalemate there. Schumer coming out to the floor just hours later, railing on Donald Trump's first moves, regulatory moves on a HUD regulation, as well as not relinquishing their opposition to some key nominees. So the question is, does this make a difference as it affects the Democrats or even his own party when he starts saying these things, attacking us of both sides in these campaign speeches?
But that's so, the rhetoric was so appealing, not just to his supporters, but that's some of those lines were the same kind of message we might have heard from Bernie Sanders or, the Democratic side. And it was just such a stunning rebuke of the people sitting behind him, and not just President Obama, but, George W. Bush, and talking about shrinking America's role around the world, building up infrastructure. That really appeals to a lot of people out there, and that's going to be his sweet spot if he can pull it off.
One thing that we should add too about yesterday, Schumer's speech before Trump spoke at the inaugural was not exactly sort of a come together, we're all in this together. It was essentially a party doctrine, and so
it was a pre-bubble.
It was exactly, and it was much more so than we have heard in a while. And so I understand what Schumer is doing, but if you are Trump, you hear that, and then you say you're only yelling at me about why we're not doing things together. That is an understandable point.
It was interesting from the platform when Schumer was speaking, you could hear boos.
Right.
So back here, the ticketed people up front with the VIPs, when you moved back to where you had the Trump people who traveled from over the country, they were booing. But hang on, just one quick, Dan, we got to take a quick break here. You're watching the rallies in Chicago, in Washington, they're in Boston, they're in Denver, they're elsewhere as well. We'll continue to keep an eye on these protests on the first full day of the Trump administration. Much more Inside Politics when we continue in just a moment.